Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for hopping on. I'm just going to wait a few seconds here as folks continue to join, and then we'll go ahead and get started. Alrighty, well, thank you all for being here today. This session is getting recorded, so if anyone does have to jump early, we'll be setting the live recording afterwards. During the presentation, please do feel free to share questions in the chat, and we'll get to them at the end of the presentation. And also, if there's anyone in the audience that has survived a storm event in the past, please do feel free to add to the chat measures that you have taken that have worked for you in the past, so we can continue to learn and expand our education on disaster preparedness together. My name is Tessa Barron, and I am SVP's Prepare Program Associate. My background is in mitigation, specifically with stormwater studies, plans, and master plans at the state government level in South Carolina. And I am really happy to be here with you all today, speaking about different mitigation options for protecting homes from hurricanes and flooding. SVP's main mission is to shrink the time between disaster and recovery. And SVP accomplishes this by using a comprehensive approach that includes 5 key components of disaster preparedness, disaster recovery, and long-term resilience to cover the entire disaster cycle. And as you can see, Prepare is one of SVP's 5 interventions. So here's our agenda of what we're going to cover today. First, we'll briefly review the Prepare program as a whole. Then we'll go over the topics that were covered in webinar 1, which took place yesterday at 1 o'clock. And then we'll shift gears to focus on key mitigation actions that you can teach to your community so folks can be better prepared to build personal and community resilience. And those key actions include inspections and maintenance, quick actions that can be taken pre-disaster, and lastly, mitigation options. Following this webinar, please take a few minutes to complete SVP's survey so the Prepare team can evaluate participant learning and continue improving our presentation so it can be the most beneficial to our audience. And thank you all so much in advance. We really do appreciate any and all feedback that you could provide us with today. Specifically, through the Prepare program, we aim to better equip not only households, but different types of local leaders with the knowledge and capacity to make informed disaster preparedness decisions and to ultimately build more disaster resilient communities. SVP is here to offer preparedness and resilience trainings for households, small businesses, nonprofits, and local officials to start preparing for the next event. We tailor these presentations to the specific needs of each of our audiences, so each training is beneficial and informative. At SVP, we believe that achieving personal and community resilience and mitigating risks requires the actions of policymakers, community leaders, and individual residents. Education is what drives these actions. And because of that, SVP's Prepare program offers a wide range of resources that can be used to take such actions. And these include things like checklists, written guides, videos, in-person trainings, webinars, and with the use of our Equip app and the SVP website. In addition to the offerings that the Prepare program has, SVP as a whole has a plethora of resources to help survivors navigate the recovery and avoid common pitfalls such as contractor fraud, mold scams, and complex FEMA and insurance processes. These materials include live and recorded webinars, printed materials, PSAs, train the trainer offerings, etc. And if you're interested in learning more about what SVP can offer, please browse through our website or reach out using the contact information that I'll share at the end of this presentation. So you are attending the second webinar in the Disaster Preparedness in Your Communities series. For those of you who were unable to attend the first webinar yesterday afternoon, We focused on making recovery plans in advance and building a culture of preparedness. So we'll start off with a brief review of yesterday's session, and then we'll jump right into mitigation options to protect against risk. So building a culture of preparedness. Why is this important? Well, unfortunately, we know that there will be more floods. It's not a question of if, but unfortunately of when. So as you make tough recovery decisions, it's absolutely critical that you think about how to equip community members better for the next event. This is just the start of our conversation today about preparing for future floods. So please do feel free to reach out to me or any others at SBP if you'd like to talk more about this after today, again, with that contact information that I'll share at the end of the presentation. Building a culture of preparedness means working across the entire disaster spectrum, from preparedness to response to long-term recovery to building resilience, all in the efforts to embed disaster preparedness activities into conversations that are already happening today that are surrounding disaster response and resilience. We need to consider preparedness at the individual level, the local and community level, the state level, and the federal level. If the majority of citizens are prepared in advance, then that way government forces will be able to focus on those who cannot recover themselves. So that would be those that are the most vulnerable, including those that are disabled, 65 years of age or older, and those with children 5 and under. SBP as a whole aims to serve the groups that will have the hardest time responding to and recovering from disasters. So this is why we really urge people to prepare themselves to the best of their ability. Yesterday's webinar covered making disaster preparedness plans, household level recovery financing options, options for making insurance more affordable, and the importance of protecting your documents. If you're interested in learning more, we did record that webinar yesterday, and we can certainly send that to you if you're wanting to dive into that a little bit more. With the knowledge gained from both of the webinars in this disaster preparedness in your community series, you will be equipped with the knowledge and capacity that you'll need to lead your networks and your communities towards making informed disaster preparedness decisions and building your community's resilience. So now we're going to go ahead and shift gears to understanding risks so you can ultimately reduce those risks. It's critical to know exactly what you and your community will be up against this upcoming hurricane season. So it's really imperative to stay educated and to also encourage your community to prioritize risk education as well. So you might find it effective to just cut to the chase for your audience members and for your community. Why should they care? Extreme storm events are becoming more frequent, and places that weren't positioned to be at risk in the past are now increasingly so. Because of this, your audience may need to now take actions to protect their home against future flooding. And the best, most effective way to safeguard homes from floodwaters is through mitigation actions. While it might seem like an investment in some cases, investing in mitigation options can help save money in the long run. In fact, conservative estimates do note that $1 vested in mitigation actions can save $4 in future losses, and those estimates are currently increasing. Some sources note that it can be as high as $6 saved. Knowing your risks can be framed as an action that your audience can take with their families. I suggest using the tool Risk Factor, and this was developed by the First Street Foundation. And with this tool, you can suggest your audience sits with their families, plugs in their address and their zip codes together, and can check their current and future risks. When covering risks, it's really valuable to emphasize the importance of, again, this continued education because risks are evolving. And as noted in the previous slide, areas that may not have been at risk in the past may be at risk now. It's a priority to understand risks and to know what to plan for. You can also recommend that your attendees use FEMA's National Risk Index for natural hazards to check out the community's risk as a whole. So that way folks can develop a comprehensive understanding of the risks they'll face. The main takeaway here is that you'll want to prompt your network to identify the hazards most likely to occur in their community and also the impacts that those risks will have. Today, we're going to be diving into actions that you can prompt your community to take in order to mitigate risks to properties and protect homes against physical damage. Some of these actions require just a little bit of thinking ahead and some elbow grease, and some are more of an investment. It's crucial to think about the different options out there and really what makes the most sense for the people that your organization serves. Inspections and maintenance actions are crucial to prioritize throughout the year to keep your houses in good condition, to identify issues while they're small and less expensive to fix, and so that everything within your community's power can be done to mitigate potential risks to properties this upcoming hurricane season. When teaching your audience the importance of inspections and maintenance, it's helpful to categorize these activities in 3 main buckets. And this will help folks really organize their processes and ensure that they are not missing any really important actions that will help keep themselves and their property safe. So you'll want to consider using these 3 categories, these 3 buckets. And the first is inspections and maintenance actions to take inside of the home, and then inspections and actions to take outside of the home, and then lastly, actions that folks can take to maintain and to inspect their roof. SPP does have resource guides for inspecting properties and roofs that you can access on our website. You can consider bringing hard copies of these resources if you're planning on holding any sort of preparedness trainings in person, or you can absolutely drop links in a chat box if you're planning any preparedness trainings or sessions online. While this webinar focuses on protecting properties against hurricanes and floods, it's important to note that some of these actions, especially those that target home protection during high wind events, are relevant across different types of storms, such as tornadoes. Encourage your communities when they're planning and mapping out different inspection and maintenance actions that they make sense for their homes to consider all hazard events that they might be at risk for and to plan accordingly. Okay, so starting off with property inspections and maintenance actions for inside of the home. Here are some actions that we usually direct folks towards taking so they may be the best prepared for hurricanes and high wind events. Actions include inspecting heating and cooling systems, inspecting water heaters, ensuring that furnace filters get changed, and inspecting the state of caulk, weather stripping, and insulation throughout homes. It's great to guide folks to build a home inventory to document their items. And that's because having a home inventory is going to expedite the process of making an insurance claim in the aftermath of a storm. SPP's main mission, again, is to shrink the time between disaster and recovery. And having a home inventory in advance of a storm is one way that we can help disaster survivors do this. Here are some inspections and maintenance actions to share with your communities and your networks to take outside of the home. These actions include removing dead trees and overhanging limbs, clearing properties of yard debris, avoiding having bare ground, so planting vegetation really wherever is possible, inspecting yard structures and keeping those structures in good repair, and inspecting any sloped areas or patios or retaining walls and having them checked out by a geotechnical engineer if signs of slope movement or structural degradation are evident. You'll also want to urge your community to secure outdoor furniture in advance of storms, keep their gutters, drains, and downspouts clear, and make sure that these downspouts are directed away from properties so they don't channel water towards the house and seep through the foundation. So that third bucket for inspections and maintenance is actions to take for the roof. And these actions are as follows. So first, regularly inspecting the roof cover. So important things to look for here are to check to see if the roof is in good condition and that it's securely attached. You'll want to direct your audience to look for things like loose shingles and cracks in the shingles, broken or missing tabs, etc. Inspect roof penetrations. So look to see that those penetrations are well sealed and tight, and check for any badly deteriorated holes and gaps. Inspect ridge vents and off ridge vents, and inspect the roof for leaks. So look for leaks in the attic, water stains on roof decking, discolored roof deck rafters or trusses, and look for water stains on ceilings inside of the home, cracked wall or paint, and peeling wallpaper. If you happen to be aware of any renters that may be in your audience, if you're conducting any sort of preparedness presentations, be sure to encourage them to review their lease and to have conversations with their landlord about who is exactly responsible for what when it comes to the rental property or apartment. So of course, it's absolutely paramount that a roof is protected in the face of a high wind event, such as hurricanes or tornadoes. If someone in your community does lose a roof, not only will it be expensive to fix, but it'll also damage the house structure. It'll impact the stability of the house, and it will leave the people and everything inside of the home vulnerable and at the mercy of the elements. When SBP builds, the organization prioritizes the use of fortified roofs. So with years of testing and scientific research, that has proven that this roofing methodology keeps wind and rain out of homes during high wind events, hurricanes, hailstorms, severe thunderstorms, tornadoes, etc. The added cost to do a fortified roof is roughly $3,000 for labor and materials based on SBP's experience. If seeking a fortified certification for the roof is desired, then an extra $300 to $500 is required for the fortified evaluator to come to the property and inspect the roof to make sure it meets those standards. In some states, fortified roofs do qualify for insurance discounts and tax incentives. You'll want to make sure that you communicate to your audience the importance of preparing for powder outages simply because they can happen with most any storm event. Help folks get prepared by sharing actions they can take year-round to be prepared, such as testing their fire alarms and their carbon monoxide monitors. Because of course, as we know, carbon monoxide poisoning, it can happen very quickly and it can happen without warning. Highlight that folks should prepare their households by identifying an alternative power source like a generator. Plan to include a section in your preparedness training on generator safety. When used correctly, generators are really great backup tools to utilize in the event of power outages. However, it's important to know generator safety rules before operating. Some safety precautions to take are using the generators themselves and the fuel outdoors, at least 20 feet away from windows, doors, and any attached garages. Let generators cool completely and keep them dry before refueling. Plug appliances directly into a generator or a heavy-duty extension cord works just fine, but do make sure that all electrical cords attached to the generator are in really good working condition. Avoid electrical shock by keeping electrical cords away from any pooled water, ice, or snow that might be present. And in addition to using this generator safely, make sure to emphasize to your audience that they'll want to know the specific energy needs that their family has and to purchase a generator that best suits those needs. Last, we just like to highlight here that when you're talking to your audience in the event of a power outage, you really want to harp on the fact that folks should never, ever use a gas stovetop or an oven to heat their homes. Now we're going to talk about mitigating risk by securing properties for emergencies. These actions will require just a little bit of planning in advance. It could be really helpful to use a seasonal framing when you're talking to your community about different ways to protect their homes. The inspections and maintenance actions that we just covered could happen throughout the year, but you want to make sure that you emphasize to folks that these actions should be completed in advance of hurricane season. Think of these securing for emergencies and these actions that we're going to cover as actions that folks can take in season. But a critical area to emphasize here is that while these actions can happen in season, some will require supplies and materials that should be identified and secured in advance of hurricane season. We'll talk through mitigation actions a little bit later on in the presentation, but those actions with this seasonal framing will need to be thought through well in advance. And that's because in some cases, they will require structural changes and major changes to properties. So here are some quick actions that you can urge your community and your network to take pre-storm, such as laying sandbags near doorways and moving valuable items off of the floor. These actions here are relatively quick actions. They're relatively easy. And when taken prior to storm events, they can help people save money during the recovery process. When speaking to your audience about these different types of actions, I advise that you really try to personalize it as best you can. So perhaps you could share what valuable items you've identified that you'd move off the ground floor first. For me, I would move, for example, I have a food supply on some bottom shelves, making sure to include both my food and the dog's food that are there, any Wi-Fi routers or cords that are on the floor. And I store some watercolor paints and some board games on the bottom shelf in my living room. And I would prioritize this not only because these just happen to be low-lying items that are valuable to me, but in the event that I had to shelter in place and say I lost power, those are the very first items that I'd be reaching for to occupy myself. So I mentioned this to say that there's of course, an importance in considering the necessities and those items that you will need, but it's also important to make sure that you have those comfort items accounted for as well when you're going through and taking these pre-storm actions. In the same vein, I'd also go ahead and share some outdoor items that you've identified yourself or that just happen to be common items to bring inside that folks will want to bring inside before a storm event. So some common examples here are lawn furniture, umbrellas, bikes, scooters, and really anything that can turn into a dangerous projectile during a high wind event. When understanding risks, consider what other storm events are also likely to occur and some specific actions that they might require pre-disaster as well. Because sandbags are effective and they're really popular temporary flood barriers, it's important to think through alternate solutions to keep homes protected from floodwaters. When talking to your audience and preparing for storms, consider using a theme of keeping the peace. And what I mean by this is that hurricanes and flooding events are hectic. They can be fast-paced, especially if your area is prone to flash flooding, and they can really cause folks to panic. Think about how people might feel if sandbags are their go-to tool for temporarily protecting their homes from floods. And all of a sudden stores run out quickly and they no longer have access to sandbags. I know if I were in that situation, that would certainly cause me to panic. With the information shared in this webinar series, we want you as community leaders to be able to equip your network with the knowledge that they'll need to keep themselves protected and to make this hurricane season as predictable as possible. So specific to the sandbags, some alternative solutions that you might want to offer for the bags themselves are pillowcases, tarps, or plastic bags, but do consider doubling those plastic bags for extra protection. For the filling itself, any heavy or moldable items will absolutely suffice. So things along the lines of potting mix or small gravel or rocks, even kitty litter, dirt, or heavy items like old clothing, rags, and blankets are going to work well as alternate solutions for what to fill in the sandbag if sand is not available. Because there are a good number of storm shutters to choose from, you might want to arm yourself with at least a surface level understanding of what's available. So that way, while you'll absolutely be able to point your community to the experts to have these in-depth conversations on the most appropriate shutters to purchase, you'll at least be able to provide a helpful starting point when having these initial conversations on preparing for hurricane season. So of course, there are different types of storm shutters, and what's most appropriate for a certain household is going to depend upon their specific house type or their budget or other specific needs that they may have. So just do consider that, if you are going to have a preparedness presentation and you're going to give it to a specific audience as opposed to one that's open for the general public, you can absolutely offer specific guidance on where to begin if you are aware of some of those common housing types or other specific needs in that area. So just to run through briefly these different types of common shutters that we have listed here. The first is storm panel shutters. So these attach to your walls, around your doors or windows. And I mentioned this first because this is a really cost-effective solution that you can offer to folks. The one negative here is that they are a little bit more difficult to install than other options. And when not in use, they will need to be removed and properly stored. So some of these options that we'll walk through, they can stay on the house permanently, but this one, it can potentially be inconvenient because again, they will need to be removed and stored. Another option is automatic roll down shutters. So these attach to the windows themselves and of course roll down when needed and can roll back up into a box when not in use. So this option is a little bit more costly, certainly, but many people do go this route because they can be permanently secured to the windows and for just the overall ease of using these items. And another important part to highlight with these automatic roll down shutters is that they can be manually operated. So imagine you're in a situation where you lose power, you will still be able to use these. And that's just something that's very important to consider because again, these power outages are something that can happen with any storm. So you do want to make sure that the protective measures you're putting into place are able to be manually done in the face of a power outage. So the next is an accordion shutter. And this is another one like the prior option that permanently attaches to your windows. This is a great option because it's budget friendly and it does work really well with large windows and with glass doors. They do fold up accordion style, hence the name. So when not in use, you fold them right up and they don't block your view. So another popular option there. Colonial shutters are one of the last two that we're going to briefly talk through today. And these are mainly chosen for aesthetic reasons. So these shutters attach to the side of the windows and they can be folded up. So that way they give the appearance of being normal shutters when they're not in use. When a storm is approaching, these shutters are unfolded and they do have to be secured with a storm closure bar. So what's good about this option is that it's a bit more customizable than the other options, but what does go hand in hand with that is that it is a little bit more pricey than some of the other storm shutters that we just briefly talked through. And last, but certainly not least, we have the Bahamas shutters option. So these, same as the colonial shutters, are often chosen for their appearance. They attach to the top of the window. And what's great with this option is they can be left on for normal days and quickly shut and locked to protect a home from incoming storms. So in addition to housing type or budget or other specific needs, there are other considerations that folks do need to be thinking through before selecting a specific storm shutter that's going to work best for their house. So the first is materials. In a little bit, we will chat a little bit about knowing risks in the presentation, but for the sake of storm shutters, it's imperative to understand personal and community risks so folks can choose the materials that will keep them best protected, as different types of materials can, of course, withstand different types of wind speeds. Installation is the second item that you're going to really want to urge folks to think through here. You're going to want folks to understand in advance whether or not they are going to want to install the storm shutters, or if it really would just make more sense to obtain professional help. Timing, like I briefly mentioned before, while these quick pre-disaster actions will take place in season, people do need to plan ahead and think about just how much time they'll have to purchase the most appropriate shutters and to do research to determine what the most appropriate shutter might be. And they'll need to plan to have enough time to also install these shutters all before the next storm event. So it will take, of course, some planning in advance. With the home style, as we mentioned before, the last two options are often chosen more for their aesthetics. So really important to think about what might look the best and what might be the most appealing. It might not always offer the best protection. So really understanding a house's specific needs and what is necessary to be installed to be best protected. Alternative solutions to those storm shutters, while not as effective, it is really imperative to offer those to your community members as well, because even a little bit of protection is better than none. So two different types of solutions that could be offered as an alternative to a storm shutter are fabric storm panels, and boarding up windows with plywoods is also an option. But good to note that boards may tear off easier in a storm than the storm shutters. And that could, of course, result in some damage to the home. So we do want to avoid that if possible. And additionally, plywood may be harder to remove after the fact. So just important things to think through if you plan on introducing to your community the importance of storm shutters and different options there. While inspections and maintenance actions and those quick pre-disaster actions that we just covered are really helpful ways to keep a property safe from hurricanes and flooding, investing in mitigation options is the most effective way to safeguard properties in the face of future storms. So mitigation really does seem to be a buzzword that gets tossed around a lot lately. So in order for us to teach about different mitigation options, it's important to define it. This could be a good technique for you to use in the beginning of any presentations that you or your organization might hold, just in an effort to provide a little bit of level setting for your audience. You don't know the level of knowledge that your attendees will have when it comes to disaster preparedness or recovery and the resilience world in general. So when giving a presentation about mitigation options for protecting homes from hurricanes and flooding, providing that definition right off the bat of mitigation would provide inclusivity and accessibilities for all of your attendants. So something that we do suggest to offer at the beginning of any presentations that you guys might be holding. So with that being said, we define mitigation or hazard mitigation planning as actions that reduce or eliminate the long-term risk to people and property by minimizing the impact of natural disasters. Okay, so mitigation options and insurance. The relationship between mitigation options and insurance is another critical area to cover with your community and your network. Urge your audience to keep in the back of their minds that mitigation actions may lower insurance costs and they may result in tax deductibles in some states. So as you talk through some of these options, ask that your audience, to the best of their ability, not automatically write these off if they sound cost prohibitive at first blush. Empower your audience to just do a little bit of research and see what their state offers. Mitigation options, it just might be more affordable than your audience may realize. An easily digestible way to think about it is like this. Insurance costs are, of course, tied to risks. So if you introduce mitigation measures to your property, not only are you safeguarding your house from future storms, but you're also lowering your risk. And therefore, you're lowering your liability to insurance companies, which means that you just might be reducing your insurance costs. Some examples of these options are raising mechanicals, so things like heating and cooling systems, water heaters, electrical panels, etc., installing flood openings, filling basements, elevating properties, and providing that elevation certificate, and relocating. Stress to your audience the importance of getting elevation certificates. Those certificates document the elevation of your building for the floodplain managers enforcing local building ordinances for insurance rating purposes. While no longer required for purchasing a federal flood insurance policy, getting your elevation certificate is one of the easiest ways to reduce insurance premium costs. Additionally, you could prompt your community to have conversations with their insurance agents on what mitigation options count towards those premium reductions. Some mitigation options are certainly an investment, no way around it. So it's very helpful to offer some budget-friendly options to your network. Here are some suggestions that we typically suggest to homeowners in public-facing webinars, such as protecting utilities and service equipment, replacing carpet with tiles, installing backwater preventers and sump pumps, and flood-proofing interiors of building systems. One route that you can suggest is replacing carpets with tiles. This is a great option to take in light of the fact that tiles are flood resistant, durable, they're easy to clean, and they require little maintenance. If you do plan on taking this information and compiling it into a preparedness presentation for your community, you might want to consider including resources that your audience members can utilize, such as any local companies that they can reach out to for estimates on making this type of switch. In the same vein of defining mitigation, it could also be useful to define different mitigation options, such as backwater preventers that just might not be well known to your audience. So backwater preventers, they serve as physical barriers between a home's water system and the public water and sewer that prevents the backflow of water from re-entering pipes and ultimately contaminating that water. In addition to defining terms, it's also really helpful to clearly and succinctly define the use. So in the case of backwater preventers, if floodwaters enter the sewer or septic, sewage can backflow into the home, which of course poses a threat and is dangerous to the water supply. This is especially harmful if folks do not have a backup water source and are sheltering in place. And backwater preventers, they prevent this from happening. So of course, it's important to speak to your audience about things they can do to stay safe during storms, like getting water in advance. But it's paramount to prompt folks to take a proactive approach to ensure their water supplies stay intact and safe during hurricane and flood events that they might face. You may also want to encourage your audience to look into different factors that impact the cost of installing backwater preventers. These factors include things such as permit fees, testing of the system, anti-theft devices that can get installed, and thermostatic freeze relief tools that can be installed to prevent freezing. By arming your audience with this information, they will feel more confident and more capable to begin the process of determining whether or not backwater preventers make sense for their homes. In the next two slides, we'll cover what sump pumps are along with their importance. Similarly to backwater preventers, we want to ensure that we aren't assuming that the audience has a certain baseline of knowledge, and instead we just want to go ahead and provide this information upfront, clearly and concisely. Sump pumps are helpful tools that transfer water from low-lying areas and homes to places where the water can drain safely away. So sump pumps are really great tools because they prevent damage to the structure of homes. They control mold and mildew growth, and they can prevent electrical hazards. Again, you have the opportunity here to provide contact information for perhaps local basement waterproofing companies or plumbers, if you are giving those localized preparedness presentations, or even if you're just having informal conversation about these types of mitigations that folks can implement. Lastly, we'll talk through some long-term mitigation options that, while again an investment, they are effective means to safeguard properties and lower physical damage to homes. At this point, I would suggest that you circle back to the impact that mitigation options may have on insurance premiums, and possibly even walk through some different financial assistance options and grant programs to help with affordability. I recommend checking out Smart Home America, which is a really great resource that folks can check out and look to see if there are mitigation insurance discounts or incentives or even tax savings, and to really determine what different states have available. So some of the mitigation options listed in the previous slide certainly might seem alarming and cost prohibitive to your audience. So taking the time to dive into first steps when considering these options will make all the difference. For example, here are some initial thoughts that one might need to think through before contemplating filling their basement. So that includes things like, how often does your basement flood? Does the basement lie below the BFE, which is the base flood elevation, another area where you could provide a definition, which is the elevation of surface water resulting from a flood that has a 1% chance of equaling or exceeding that level in any given year. It's also great to think in advance of any mechanicals that are in the basement, such as furnaces or hot water heaters, and to note that these can get relocated to the attic or to the main level. Elevations are another long-term mitigation option that you can absolutely introduce to your network. I'd encourage you actually to do a deep dive into elevations and to start with those initial considerations, because that will really drive folks away from feeling intimidated with this option. Some items to think through are housing structure type, the proper height that the elevation might need to be, the possibility of incorporating existing foundations, any and all hazards that may impact the property, how access to homes might be impacted and therefore how it might be accomplished with this new elevation, and just understanding the different types of elevation techniques and what is the most appropriate. Next, we like to provide a nice step-by-step instruction to help give networks an understanding of what makes the most sense for the property. So thinking through the cost of elevating the property and comparing that to the home value. If elevating costs more, then it's just more effective to rebuild the property new and elevated. However, when looking at these two values, if the cost of elevating the property is less than the value of the home, we certainly suggest proceeding with elevating that property. After disasters, SBP rebuilds for low to moderate income homeowners, with placing a really special focus on families with small children, clients that are elderly, disabled persons, war veterans, and those that are under and uninsured. SBP prioritizes implementing measures that will help homeowners and disaster survivors mitigate risk and, importantly, and more resilient in the face of future storm events. So we just have a couple pictures here. On the roof is that same type of fortified roof that we had talked through earlier in the presentation. So just to show you what that would look like. But then the two pictures of the inside of the homes are examples of vinyl plank flooring. And this often gets used during rebuilding activities because, with SVP, because it's resistant to water damage, which certainly makes it easier to maintain. And most instances of flooring can get wet and dry out again. Vinyl plank flooring is a very standard material, and it's not really any more expensive than laminate, which is another common flooring type outside of carpet and tile. For your knowledge, the vinyl plank flooring is about $2 per square foot, and laminate is about $1. So just an important quick fact if you're talking to any folks about making this type of switch, just to offer that it really is not all that expensive in comparison to other common flooring types. SVP does advise that you speak to your community about contractor fraud. Folks need to be proactive in order to protect themselves from potential fraud and to find contractors who can give quality work at a fair price. You can offer reminders to always check with the local building department on licensing and permitting requirements for projects. SVP does have guides that can be used and that you can share with your communities. And we do have short interactive learning modules on contractor fraud and also federal assistance and much more that you are more than welcome to check out following this presentation. Okay, so to wrap up today, in addition to our trainings, SBP has built out really wonderful resources in the form of written guides, checklists, short videos, and e-learnings on both preparedness and recovery topics. These are available to download from SBP's website, as well as accessible through our phone application, Equip. And through this app, households can go ahead and track their progress through various preparedness activities, and they can get guidance on different parts of the recovery process overall. SCP's Prepare program is building out new resources, and we will be releasing these through these platforms here in the next coming months. Here are just some additional resources that you might want to consider taking a look at and sharing with your community. So things such as IBHS, again, going to that fortified roof option. They have a lot of wonderful information on their website that dives more into depth than we were able to today. And then just information on roofing and tips in general. So really great tools that you can arm yourself with and bring back to your community to equip them with the information and the knowledge that they'll need. And here's just another page of some wonderful resources that we at the Prepare team had a chance to look through and are really wonderful when we're preparing for hurricane season and making sure that our preparedness approach is really comprehensive and touches on all aspects that we would need to in order to be the most proactive and get ready for hurricane season. Empower your audience to take action now by learning about individual and community risk, understanding how implementing mitigation options may lower insurance premiums and result in tax deductibles and incentives, and investigate actions to mitigate risks to property. Disaster preparedness and community resilience can only be built through actions taken at the personal, community, state, and federal level together. By working together with your network to get educated and become prepared, you are doing your part in building a safer and better community that will be able to come together and persevere during this upcoming hurricane season. Again, as a reminder, if you wouldn't mind following this webinar, taking just a few minutes to complete our quick survey so we can continue to evaluate our participant learning and better our presentation to be beneficial and most impactful for our audience. And again, we really appreciate the time spent on that in advance. Any feedback that you guys might be able to offer us would be absolutely wonderful. All right, so thank you all so much. With that, we're going to go ahead and wrap up the preparedness portion of these series. And so any questions that you might have, please, again, do feel free to share them in the chat, and we will shift gears to the Q&A section of our time together today.
Thanks, Tessa. Our first question from an attendee was, what storm shutters are installed inside or outside of the home of the options you shared?
Oh, yeah, great question. So what I'll do, bear with me for 1 second. I'm just going back up to that part. But what I can do is when I follow up with everyone following the presentation, I am going to send the survey and I am going to send a recording of this. I can absolutely make sure to include some resources in there. I know I went through that pretty fast, so that way you'll be able to have something to continue to look at as you're talking to your community and sharing what options make the most sense. But as for the ones that we mentioned today, so the first was storm panel shutters, those attached to the walls or the windows. So those would be attached outside. Then for the automatic roll down shutters, those attached to the windows themselves. Accordion shutters, they can attach, those attached to the windows as well. But please note that accordion shutters also do really well with large glass doors that any of your your community members might have. So that was just an important side note there. The colonial shutters They attach to the side of the windows. But also an important note with that one is that in addition to the shutters themselves, they also require a storm closure bar. So 2-piece there. So that will need to get secured before those can function properly. And then the last is the Bahama shutters. And that attaches to the top of the window. So thank you for the question. Absolutely. But again, I will be sure that I'm including a resource that you all can refer to when I follow up with everyone after the fact.
Great. Our next question is, if we guide anyone in our communities to consider relocation, what options are also available for temporary housing that we could direct them to?
Wonderful. Thank you. So first, what I would encourage you to do is to reach out to your FEMA regional office for your state. And that would be in a scenario where a house is significantly damaged structurally and it is uninhabitable. So with that, FEMA does designate direct temporary housing assistance. So in the case that someone has questions, how can I go about with this temporary housing if I want to relocate, and there is existing structural damage, I would take that route first and begin those conversations again with the FEMA regional office for, whatever state that you might be in. However, if this is more so for a mitigation measure, so you're being proactive, you're not currently dealing with a house that has significant structural damage, I would first encourage you to have conversations with local officials to understand if there are any local options available. And second, I would advise that, again, these mitigation options, they do require planning far in advance. And so some of this planning could include either conversations with family or friends in determining temporarily staying in their homes, or it could look like planning in advance different ways that you could save money for any type of temporary housing that you might be able to determine yourself prior to the fact, because again, it is tucked into your planning process for this mitigation option.
Great. And then we also got the question of, where would we find out if our particular state offers any discounts or incentives for particular mitigation options?
Yeah, wonderful. So first, I would direct you. So a few things, but yes, first would be speaking to an insurance agent and starting that conversation there. So just talking through what different discounts and incentives are available. I would also advise checking out Smart Home America. They have a ton of wonderful information on mitigation programs, funding, additional resources, and other types of incentives. And what's really great with that resource, which is again Smart Home America, is that is broken down by state. So you'll be able to very easily see what is available to you based on your location. Lastly, I would also consider contacting, again, local officials, that FEMA regional office for your state, your NFIP state coordinator, even your state historic preservation office, to see if you are eligible for any types of financial assistance to help pay for some of these retrofitting projects.
Thanks, Tessa. It's definitely hard for households to navigate that. And the Smart Home America resource is really fantastic. But for anyone that goes there, you'll see they haven't built it out yet for every state. And so going to some of the state agencies that Tessa just mentioned and others can be great to build a custom list for your particular state of what options are available. And then I think finally, someone asked, what other webinar opportunities do you have coming up that perhaps households could be directed to?
Yeah, well, I'm so glad you asked. We actually have tomorrow evening at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we have a presentation, and this is for the general public, specific to an audience of households and disaster preparedness at the individual household level. So we have one of those tomorrow, again at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard, and then we will have that same presentation. We'll be holding it again on June 15th. So just to reiterate, that's a household level disaster preparedness webinar. Both of those they're the same type of presentation that we'll be going through twice. And then we also do have a 2-part series, and this is also household audience, household disaster preparedness, where we really deep dive into some of the different measures that we want to encourage folks to take at the household level before hurricane season is upon us. And that will take place on May 3rd and May 24th. I do just want to note that if anyone in the audience is interested in having the Prepare team conduct an in-person training, a webinar for their community and their network, this contact information that we have on the screen here, please do reach out. We're working with many partners this year in developing tailored preparedness webinars, trainings, initiatives, et cetera. And we would be more than happy to extend these offerings to anyone that happens to be in the audience today.
Great. And on that note, we wanted to turn it over to our partners at the SHARE program at SBP, who helped us organize this today and get all of you on. So Angela, if you want to unmute yourself to share anything.
Yeah, thanks, Helen and Tessa. Appreciate the introduction. I don't know if any of you on here are already working with SHARE, and so great to have you on here. If not, my name's Angela, like Helen said. I run our SHARE program at SBP, and so that's basically our in-house foundation that provides grants to kind of smaller to medium-sized nonprofits across the U.S. For long-term disaster recovery. And in addition to that, we help facilitate and host a different series of trainings, generally virtually, sometimes also in person. And so I think the link is already in the chat. I saw Helen popped it in there. But if anybody is interested in looking at our menu of upcoming trainings for the next few months, spring into summer, as well as any open grants we have, I'd encourage you to check out that website link. So thank you. If we're already partnered, thank you for being here. And if you're new, it's very nice to meet you, and I hope to work with you soon. So thank you, Helen. I'll hand it back over to you and Tessa.
Alrighty, well, thank you so much, Angela, and thank you for those questions, Helen. At this point, we will go ahead and wrap up. But again, I will be sending a follow-up email with the resources and survey and the recording if anyone would like to access that after the fact. And please do be sure to write down this contact information and reach out at any time with any preparedness questions, or if you're interested in chatting about further ways that the Prepare team could potentially serve you with webinars for your community and your networks. So thank you all so much again, and have a wonderful afternoon.